Disclaimer, this video script was written before the events in Ukraine happened in the last couple of weeks. I changed bits of it and re-recorded the whole thing in lieu of recent events. So forgive me if this is less comical, if I don't do my normal shtick in this video. I wanted to be sensitive to what's going on, but I still wanted to talk about the topic that I wanted to discuss today. This video's description will have a link where you can donate to refugees fleeing Ukraine. And with that, on with the video. Russia is big. Like, really big. I doubt that's a groundbreaking statement to make. It is well known as the largest country on Earth. At over 17 million square kilometers, it's both the largest country in Europe and the largest country in Asia. And yes, I did just say the same thing twice, because Europe and Asia are the same continent. The Russian Federation spans 11 time zones, when 12 time zones would be half the planet. In terms of surface area, Russia is bigger than the dwarf planet Pluto, and until relatively recently in history, it was a hell of a lot bigger than that. You can kind of see why, during the Cold War, people thought the Soviet Union was taking over the world. Emphasis on thought, as in past tense, as in not happening anymore. What the fuck? But what do I mean by Russia is the 4th largest country in North America? Sure, it's huge, but that's just not where it is, right? And sure, it used to own this enormous chunk of North America, but it sold it to the United States in 1861 for what genuinely, adjusted for inflation, accounts to only $144 million in today's money. But no, I mean right now. Russia is the 4th largest country in North America today. Russian America still exists. The North American plate is huge. It's the 2nd largest tectonic plate on Earth after the Pacific plate. It stretches from the Eurasian plate in the east to the Eurasian plate in the west. But yeah, you see what I'm talking about here, right? It wasn't just the United States manifesting its destiny to the west. Apparently the entire continent took that phrase to heart. Though I am glad that North America didn't take into account every imperialistic phrase that we had in the 1800s, or else it would have folded Canada in half when James K. Polk said 54-40 or fight. Exactly how big is disputed, but for the sake of this video I'm going to use the rough borders given to us by Stanford University, because people who go to Stanford have rich parents and that makes them smarter.
Flashback.
So we're back. From what I understand, there's a way to calculate area on Google Earth. Is this that island? No, this is here, so it's way this way. Okay. Very vaguely that line. Extremely vaguely this shape. Ah. Right. I forgot about the curvature of the Earth for a second. I'm gonna go with that. And I'm gonna say that the islands would basically fill in the water that's here. And this is very vaguely the area of Russia that is on the North American tectonic plate. Area. That is big. All right then. I think I have a video.
End of flashback.
Yeah, imagine that. I have actual first-hand information to report in this video, as opposed to my usual thing of having an idea, looking it up, and reporting back to you what I find in the first 2 pages of Google results. Because for the life of me, I couldn't actually find any legitimate source that gave numbers to how big this chunk of Russia that is technically on the North American tectonic plate actually is. And that's for a few reasons, mainly because there hasn't been enough study done to actually find where this tectonic border really is, and every map of tectonic plates you look up has different borders here. But what is this place anyway? Well, most of it is the province of Chukotka, with a little bit of Kamchatka as well. The area in question can range from 34 degrees to -61 Celsius. It gets Mars temperature there. And because part of it's in the Arctic Circle and the rest is very close by, winter lasts 10 months. But also, what are you supposed to do when the ground you live on is permafrost and suddenly it hits 95 degrees during your 5 seconds of summer? That's not a rhetorical question. These people in Alaska are sinking into the ground. Despite the bitter cold and months without the sun, Kamchatka has been populated for a very long time. Settlements going back 8,400 years show anthropologists that humans got really nostalgic for that whole Ice Age thing that had just ended and decided to come here to live it full time. And of course, people had been here even earlier than that. It would have had to been through here which people first walked across the Bering Land Bridge into, well, the rest of North America. Russia hit its imperialism phase a little bit before the United States. When Russians first made their way to this frozen peninsula way back in 1641, they found the Chukchi people, an indigenous tribe of reindeer farmers who had yet to be contacted by the outside world. But when had such a discovery ever stopped an imperialistic people from, well, doing anything they wanted anywhere ever in history? Still to this day, a quarter of the world's population of reindeer is controlled by the herd owned by the Chukchi people. So they're still really doing the same thing in the same place with much of the same technology as their ancestors did 8,000 years ago, but now occasionally getting a few bars of Wi-Fi in the process. And now for a brief history of Russian paranoia. Ever since they were conquered by Genghis Khan in the 1200s, the core Russian people in this vague area have wanted buffer land between them and their perceived enemies. Basically, they wanted to set up their country in such a way so that if they're ever invaded, soldiers have to march through such a vast territory of icy tundra that they're no longer in fighting condition by the time they make it to Moscow. Yeah, imagine invading Russia in winter. Like, imagine being that stupid. Who in history could have possibly made that mistake? Such was life in Leningrad. Anyway, this buffer land had to extend to the west, east, south, and north if any of the many, many Russian invasions of Finland are anything to go by. These conquests are also supposed to give them access to navigable waterways, to give them access to international shipping routes, and so that other countries can't blockade them. And this is very much currently the cause of everything going on in Eastern Europe, no matter what Putin decides to come up with as whatever excuse. The Soviet Union had a lot more buffer territory than modern-day Russia does, including majorly control over the Black Sea, and therefore access to this place, which you might recognize as where the city of Constantinople is, and the single most majorly important shipping route in all of human history. Back in the 1600s, Russia looked more like this. Buffer territory, though not as much as today, had been achieved between them and their European perceived enemies. I say perceived threats in Europe because while today Russia may have valid fears about everyone in the world being against them, but that's for good reason, back then there was not a united front in Europe against them. Those alliances didn't exist. All of Europe hated itself until like 30 years ago. As for the fears of invasions from the east, those weren't valid at the time either. The Mongol Empire hadn't existed for 300 years at that point. And China at the time was currently trying to break its economic dependence on British imports as well as its people's physical dependence on opium. Both systems being cruelly and purposefully orchestrated by the British government to keep China subservient to them, which is a whole nother set of videos in and of itself. But rather than figuring this lack of pushback from the east meant they didn't need to conquer any more buffer territory, all it told the imperialist Russian people was that it would be really easy for them to do. So they pushed this far east. You can see how Chukotka is not yet included in this. But by the mid-1600s, that's what they were going after next. The Russians built a fort here on the Anyadzhirsk River in 1649, though they abandoned it within 10 years. Why? Well, despite having very many hundreds, if not thousands of years more advanced technology than the native people who lived there, and, well, being Russian, they somehow still couldn't survive the very harsh winters of the area. It's also said that they couldn't find enough large game to hunt, and seeing as the Chukchi people were being invaded, I don't think they had any incentive to share their reindeer herd. But the Russians came back. Why? Well, why else?
What inspired you to
take land from an indigenous people?
Money!
The modern-day Kamchatka Oblast. Apparently, Oblast is basically the word for province or state in Russia. Chukotka is not an oblast. It's an autonomous region, meaning it governs itself, basically, though it still has to call itself a part of Russia. Anyway, where was I? Oh right, money. Kamchatka was found to be very rich with resources, just like this other place Russia used to own in North America also later was. And so the only way to get here was by going through Chukotka. So slowly, over time, that same fort I mentioned that they had already abandoned was slowly repopulated. Things were put in place that actually allowed people to live there. And in 1725, Tsar Peter the Great, who added this much territory to the empire, decided it was time to take this bit as well. That did not actually go very well, because the first fleet he sent to conquer the region got shipwrecked, and the survivors who washed ashore were killed by the Chukchi people, and you can't really blame them. These people came here to invade them, so it's perfectly understandable. There's a reason the whole world is rallying behind the Ukrainian people as they fight off their Russian invaders at this very moment. In 1731, the military campaign led by Dmitry Pavlutsky could basically be best described as a genocide. So you'll be happy to learn he was captured and subsequently executed by the Chukchi people in 1747. Yes, while I said the Russian expansion eastward would be easier than their conquests to the west, that really stops at the particular territory we are talking about. And for similar reasons to why it's so hard to invade Russia in the winter, it's a lot harder to invade Chukotka at really any point, because their winter is 10 months long. The Chukchi were never conquered militarily. In 1778, they signed this agreement, where they were offered Russian citizenship, as well as not being forced to pay the taxes that were forced on other conquered people. The yasak is this tax paid in furs by conquered Siberian tribes to the Russian Federation. From there, the extent of control that the Russians exerted on the Chukchi people and everyone else living in the region later on waxed and waned over the centuries, depending both on how imperialistic the government was feeling at the time and how willing they were to expend the money and resources it took to control this very far-flung, extremely cold region of their country. Which is why, since the collapse of the much more imperialistic Soviet Union, slightly more imperialistic Soviet Union in 1991, Chukotka has been known as the Chukotka Autonomous Okrug, meaning it's a self-governing piece of the country, not really subservient to the laws of Moscow. So what are these far-flung Russian territories technically on the North American tectonic plate like today? Well, there's this place on Kamchatka I'd really like to go someday on vacation. I've been to Yellowstone National Park several times, and it's a beautiful place. And this here is the second largest collection of geysers on Earth after Yellowstone National Park. Okay, it got mostly buried in a mudslide and filled in by boiling water, so it's not quite what it was before this incident. But there are still several geysers and beautiful landscapes to see today. Well, maybe the volcano was just mad that they named it Kickpinch, which sounds like something that a bully would write on a note and stick to the back of a nerd in an 80s movie. Okay, let's see what else is here. Cold weather adapted plants, cold weather adapted animals, cold people, cold water, cold. Oh, there's a crater lake made by an ancient asteroid impact 3.5 million years ago. So that's a thing. I wanted to report to all of you that now, with this new definition of the end of the North American continent, that technically we had native tigers, the Siberian tiger. But no, this is the range of the Siberian tiger in nature. Despite having Siberian in their name, even this place is too cold for them. If you look at the geography of the last ice age and see the world with so much water pulled back, and you can see connections between lands that you would have no idea are really connected to one another. Papua New Guinea is a part of Australia, the continent's tectonic shelf. British Isles are really truly a part of Europe, despite how much they would pretend not to be. And here you can see Chukotka and the surrounding areas truly being a physical part of North America, not just the North American tectonic plate, but the North American continent itself, making Chukotka a genuine piece of the whole picture when looking at North America, not just a separate landmass that is technically on the North American tectonic plate like this random half of Iceland. But given the perspectives of humans and politics, I can see why it took so long for this region to be seen as what it truly is. Because for some reason, people think being a part of North America equates to being a part of the United States, when all of these exist. Speaking of these, now that we can see that Chukotka is truly a part of our North American family, let's see how North America's new neighbor compares to the countries that have been historically considered a part of North America. Mexico is the third biggest country in North America at 1.97 million square kilometers. And as such, it's also the 13th biggest country in the world. This is the most comparable sized country in North America you'll find to Chukotka. After Mexico, there's a pretty sizable drop-off between them and the next country listed on Wikipedia, Nicaragua. But hey, since we're already working with chunks of countries rather than the whole picture, why not include Alaska? They really do have quite a bit in common, don't they? Alaska, at 1.717 million square kilometers, is very comparable in size to Chukotka. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Chukotka is Russia's Alaska. And that also tells you why it's so absurdly cold there. Think about it. Russia's Alaska. That's like saying Saudi Arabia's Death Valley. As I'm sure you've heard many times before in many similar videos to this, the maps we use are these Mercator projections, heavily distorted maps that try and project a 3D image onto a 2D plane. And because of that, and because the world gets much, much smaller when it gets to the poles, every country and every landmass that is close to the poles is way bigger on this projection than they are in real life. So yes, while Canada is indeed the second largest country in the world, it's only slightly bigger than the US, the third biggest country, rather than so much massively bigger as it looks. And while Greenland is still the world's biggest island, it's not about the same size as Africa like it looks on this projection. Rather, it's about the same size as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And that is why Denmark is the 5th largest country in North America. Oh, what? You need me to explain that? That's not abundantly obvious already? Okay. Okay, so Greenland is 970,000 kilometers, making it smaller than the aforementioned part of Russia. And Greenland, as well as this half of Iceland, are both technically on the North American tectonic plate. And Greenland happens to be owned by this place, Germany's cold Florida. But wait, didn't I say Nicaragua comes next? Well, according to Wikipedia, they do. Well, I don't know whether or not Wikipedia discounts Greenland because they don't think it's a part of North America, or if they discount Greenland because they don't think it's a country. Greenland is to Denmark as Puerto Rico is to the United States. Well, this whole video is built on semantics anyway, so I'm gonna count all of them, including that half of Iceland that's technically North America. But wait, does that mean I have to include Cuba too? Because technically it's too far north to be on the Caribbean tectonic plate, and it's in North America too? Wait, are those tiny parts of Japan that are technically in North America too? We were never weebs at all, we were actually just Japanese this whole time. I've got to stop somewhere. So I'll cut to myself fiddling around on this website called The True Size Of. So this is the truesizeof.com, where you find countries here and you can drag them and compare them to the size of other countries. And let's see. Yep. The United States is bigger than the United States. Exactly what I thought.
It's bigger on the inside.
Is it?
I noticed.
Does anyone else hate looking at the international dateline? Like, who did this? How did we let this happen? We're a failure as a species. So my border from earlier was along here-ish. So keep that in mind of the vague outline of where North America stops. Drag Canada. Yeah, Canada's a bit bigger. Yeah, so I guess it would be like from Washington to like the top of Texas is this whole section. At a very awkward angle because the US is not supposed to be at this angle. Back with you. Mexico. So like I said earlier, Mexico is a lot bigger, but it's the closest thing in size comparably from a country in North America. Okay, yeah, Greenland is big. Greenland's bigger than Alaska? Yeah, wow, Greenland is bigger than Alaska. Cuba, because why not? It's got a similar coastline, honestly. Alright, and let's go through the rest of these. We got Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Panama. And of course, the finishing touch, random half of Iceland. So it is bigger than all of Central America, Cuba, and random half of Iceland. And because I still have no idea how to end videos, back to other me from several weeks ago. This has been History Science Theater. But when has such a discovery? Why is that hard to say? These conquests also meant to give Russia access to navigatable. But how do you navigate? How do you say that word? Navigable. And the piece de resistance. Oh, that's Canada again. Why am I having an easier time with the Russian words in this video than the English ones? And so the only way to get to here was going through Chukotka. Why can't I say that? It's the main subject of my video. Chukotka. Alright. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. This has been History Science Theater.